Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher and Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. This episode is going to be a bit different. We are switching things around. I've got a new book out that's been published by Bloomsbury, and I was very keen to come on podcasts myself, but obviously it was really tricky because I was the host. So my lovely friend and colleague, Emily Powel from Twinkle, has kindly agreed to be our guest host for this episode. And before she hosts it, I just want to say a massive thank you to Emily and the rest of the Twinkle SEND team for suggesting this. I try to not talk about my books and work outside of the podcast on the podcast, and I was always worried I'd overstep the mark. So I'm really, really grateful for them to suggest this and for this opportunity and for their support. So welcome to Sending the Experts with Emily Powel.
Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Emily Powel. For me, I've worked at Twinkle for 2.5 years, and before that I was a SEND teacher working with children age 5 all the way up to 19. And I'm really excited to chat about your book, Georgina, because obviously it's very relevant to the work that we do with Twinkle, even though it's something that you do outside of your job at Twinkle. So you're obviously very, very busy, as we know you are, as a parent and an author and someone who works at Twinkle. So let's get into it. Your latest book is your third book, and it's called SEND Strategies for the Primary Years. Why did you write it?
Yeah, so Emily probably knows this, but I wrote 2 books that were sort of play-based books that supported children with special educational needs. And then last year, I was really lucky. I got invited onto a parliamentary roundtable to discuss the problems with SEND by the lovely Dr. Helen Ross, who came on the podcast a while ago. She asked me if I'd come and sit in this parliamentary roundtable, which was really lovely. And it was, we were going to discuss the problems with the SEND system. And when I was sat there, it sort of lit a bit of a fire in me. I was getting a bit cross, and Emily knows I can get a bit cross about some things and stuff like that, and I get a bit heated. And yeah, it was clear that sort of play-based books weren't going to sort of extinguish this fire that it lit, and I wanted to do something different. I think it became more and more apparent to me that there are some real problems with the current SEND system, and there's so much lack of support for children with SEND in the UK, and I really wanted to do something about it. So I suppose it was written on sort of foundations of frustration with the current system. And I don't have the resources to change the system. There's nothing I felt I could do. I couldn't sort the funding problem out. I couldn't slash any waiting times or build a system for children with SEND that would work. But I thought what I can do is I can write a book, and it could make a small difference. It could support children. It should support the teachers and the parents of the children with SEND who are sort of waiting for support and waiting for assessments and waiting for EHCPs and all of this, and basically waiting for a system that works. It could give them strategies whilst they wait, so these children are supported really well whilst they're waiting for a system that doesn't seem to be supporting them well enough, I suppose. And I think it's really easy, isn't it, to moan about the problems with the current SEND system and say what's going wrong, but it's harder to do something about it, and I wanted to do something.
Absolutely. I think it's amazing that writing a book that will educate people who are inside the system and working with those learners, and that will help them. So who is the book for? Is it just for teachers, or would it help parents or Senkos as well?
Yeah, I suppose anybody that supports or parents children with SEND who are sort of primary aged, I suppose. So yeah, it's for teachers, TAs, Senkos, heads, families of children with SEND. In my research, there was 2 big things that sort of stuck out. There was the Ofsted 2023 report that said that only 1/3 of teachers have received SEND training since April 2021, which I was like, what? And then according to the National Autistic Society, I think it was in 2023, 70% of autistic children felt that their teachers needed to know more about autism. And those sort of stuck out to me. And it's not through any fault of teachers or heads or Senkos or anything like that. We know that. But I think there is a real need to upskill teachers and on SEND, and I think they want more training on SEND. So hopefully this book can help with that.
The fact that learners themselves are saying, like, I need my teachers or TAs or the staff that are working with me to understand me better is a crucial kind of finding.
Yeah, it's upsetting, isn't it, when you actually think about it? It's horrible.
It is wild, and especially because strategies and knowledge and research comes on so far. So the fact that there hasn't been that much training going on for teachers since 2021, and we know that in the 3 years that, I mean, even in the 2.5 years that I've worked for Twinkle, I've learned so much about new research, new strategies that we could use, and that in hindsight I would have loved to have access to when I was in the classroom. So other than raising awareness, what are your hopes for your books and strategies for the
Yeah.
primary years?
I suppose my main hope is that it makes a difference to children with SEND. I feel like they've been let down. Again, it's not any fault of teachers. So please, teachers listening, I don't blame you at all. I think it's a whole systemic issue with the way children with SEND are being supported at the moment. You know, lack of specialist settings, all of the problems I've already listed, and I won't go on about them. But yeah, I think I want to just do something to help the children and make things better for them, and for them to feel that there were more strategies in place and more resources well known and more things that were happening in schools to make them feel better supported and happier in school and learning, I suppose.
Absolutely, because they can't really learn unless you've got that fundamental like well-being in place. Like we
Exactly.
know that they need to have that before any learning can happen.
Yeah.
In chapter 1, you write about speech, language, and communication needs. So could you tell us some strategies that are useful for supporting children with SLCN in the classroom from
Yeah,
your
of course.
experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I should probably point out, I didn't put this when we were discussing this, but the book's split into 7 chapters and they cover the sort of key areas of difficulties that children might have. I didn't want to split, originally I thought I might split it into like diagnosis, like ADHD, autism, that sort of thing. And then I got some advice from somebody else on that who said, actually, the danger with doing that could be that someone might try to diagnose a child themselves from the book. And we didn't want anyone sort of accidentally doing that or presuming they knew what diagnosis a child had. So yeah, it's split into like key areas, like you said, speech and language is chapter 1. And in each chapter, it tells you, that gives you information about that area of difficulty, how you might notice the child who's got difficulties in that area, what sort of things they might be doing in the class, things they might be finding tricky. And then it gives you sort of changes you can make, resources you can use, and sort of activities and strategies you can put in place to support them. So for the speech and language one, it was quite a tricky chapter to write, Emily, because it's huge, isn't it? Like speech and language is
It's a
massive.
big deal, and it
Yeah,
affects so many pupils as well because like language difficulties co-occur with so many different things.
exactly.
So
And
it
there's such an
is,
overlap. And I think as well, like it's not as simple as speech language. Here are all the strategies to help with that. I had to be really careful to split speech into, split it into separate bits and talk about speech separately, talk about language separately, and talk about receptive language and expressive language, and then talk about communication and then social communication. So it's huge. So I can't cover it all in my answer to your question. But things like in terms of speech, there's things like modeling good speech. So making sure when we're talking as teachers, we are careful with the speed that we're talking in. We're not rushing really fast through our instructions. We're being clear and concise. So not using like really wordy questions that I'm terrible for doing this, and I really have to think about it, or had to think about it when I was teaching, is like if you want a child to do something, not adding loads of extra words. Like if you want them to come, I don't know, come and sit at the front on this this desk, instead of being like, oh, while she was sat over there, you weren't talking, you weren't engaging very well. And I was thinking, would it be better if you moved and sat next to so and so right in the front over here? It's
it's so
too
true.
much.
It's so
Like,
true.
oh my goodness, you can't.
Even I as an adult can't process all of that. Like I just
In
need
my
you to be
time, I'm
like,
saying it.
yeah, come and sit here, you'll
Yeah.
learn better.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So I think we have to, I think as teachers, and I'm very guilty of it as a podcast host as well, we put in so many extra words and just make instructions way more complex than they need to be. And I'm not saying we make them so simple that we're patronizing children, but just get to the point, make it simpler, like tell them what you're actually trying to say. Would be my first one. And then another one was like emphasizing speech sounds. So helping children who have problems with the speech sounds, making sure you're emphasizing them when you're speaking, being careful when we're correcting children. So I don't know, say a child said the fog ran across the road and they meant to say dog. Don't say it's dog, not fog. But praise the child and just repeat it back to them. So whilst emphasizing that correct speech sounds, you could be like, brilliant, yes, the dog runs across the road or something like that. So I think we have to be
yeah.
really careful with children's self-esteem. Um, yeah,
Connection before correction.
exactly that. And then for
Yeah.
language, like I said, it's huge because it's expressive and receptive language. But things like using visuals, thinking about your instructions, again, not being too wordy, not putting questions when there shouldn't be questions. I do that all the time, like not asking something when it's not even a question like, do you want to come and sit over here, when you're not actually asking them to sit if they want to. It's not a question. You need them to sit there. You tell them to sit there. Actively supporting vocabulary. So you could even pre-teach children like the vocabulary you're going to use in a lesson, or giving them vocabulary beforehand, or going through, these are the new words that we're using, these are the things that we're learning about, and teaching them that way. And then also sort of avoiding idioms, because we know that children
Yeah.
who are autistic, for example, idioms like, I think we mentioned in a podcast with Nikki Saunders, didn't we, about all the different idioms, like it's raining cats and dogs, is absolutely terrifying, the thought of it, and it makes no
Yeah.
sense to some children.
Even things like pop your shoes on or
Yeah.
pop your bum down on the chair. It's like, well, what am I
Pop.
going to pop my bum on?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so we need to be really careful in our own language, I think. Is a key one, but there's loads in the chapter, and I can't summarize it now, and Bloomsbury wouldn't be very happy if I did as well, so I have to be careful.
Fab. Okay, so what about teachers who are supporting children with literacy difficulties? What strategies and resources would you recommend for those kind of learners?
Yeah, cool. So that one's chapter 2, is literacy difficulties. And that sort of covers everything from dyslexia to other literacy difficulties, again, so that people didn't diagnose children themselves or try to. But yeah, there's so many different strategies and resources we can do to help children who have got reading difficulties. I think the biggest one is giving children time, and not just time to read, but time to write, time to organise their thoughts. Dyslexia, for example, we need to remember that it's not just all about reading and writing difficulties, but it's processing as well. So we need to be giving children a lot of time to do that. Sometimes it's a lot more time than we imagine as well, and that can be
Yeah.
difficult if we want to get on with the next bit of the lesson. But yeah, giving time. We also need to think about like opportunities, and provide children with more opportunities for reading and writing. So that could be things like a whole school culture, like having reading nooks, book fairs. Schools are great at doing this. You could have visits to the library, you could have people in to read with them, loads of different opportunities to read in school and make it fun. And then for writing, it can be things like having notepads, sticky notes. At home, you might, if you're getting ready to go to the supermarket, instead of you just jotting down what you need to get from the shop, you could say, oh, my hands are full. Would you mind just writing down these few things that I shout out that we haven't got in the cupboard, and just getting them to use a pen and pencil, because they don't get as many opportunities, I suppose, to do that in and around the house as we did when we were kids, perhaps.
Yeah, it's making like them understand why literacy is relevant as well to real life. Because if you're only ever teaching, on paper, and it's not necessarily a written task, like with my own daughter, right, she needs to know why reading and writing is important for her life. So, I'm like, you want to be able to read signs, and you want to be able to read Shop and Listen, you want to be able to read the magazines that you want. So I
Yeah.
think it's really, really important to like make them see it's relevant outside of school.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And you can do fun things with it as well. You can get chalks out. It doesn't have to be a pen and a pencil. It can be chalk, it can be finger paints, it can be anything. There's loads of lovely play-based ways you can get children to do literacy activities. Another one, I think, and it's similar to what you just said, Emily, is like being a really good role model for children in terms of reading and writing. I'm really conscious that my own kids don't see me read and write enough. And I think it's really
Yeah.
important that they need to see us. There was this lovely, I bet you've seen it on social media a while ago. There was a picture of this man, and he's reading a book on a train, and his kids are sat on his knee, and they're also reading books. And someone asked him or something like, how did you get them to do that? And it's so obvious. It's because he's reading. They want to be the same as the dad. Whereas if we're just on our phones all the time, which I'm guilty of, they're going to want to be like us and pick up an iPad or pick up a screen and do the same. So I think we need to be really conscious that children, as teachers and parents, we need to be conscious that they're watching us and they're learning from us. And if they see that we're getting enjoyment from books, if they see us reading, if they see us writing, they're seeing us finding it a useful activity to do, then it's going to influence them. So I think that one's really important.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, another one I got was sort of questioning as well if it needs to be written. So there will be children in the class that writing is really, really difficult for. Writing with a pen and pencil is really, really difficult for. And a lot of school is very literacy heavy, isn't it? A lot of it involves in writing. And I think sometimes we need to be careful with these children to think, actually, do they need to be writing, or can they use a word processor? Are we just setting them up to fail here, when actually we could be supporting them to thrive? So I think that's the conversation that needs to be had sort of with parents, with the Senko, and actually thinking, are we at the stage where maybe they would be better using a word processor, and it would actually be better for them, so they can access the curriculum better and they can show us what they actually know. rather than limiting them every single lesson by their physical capabilities of using a pen and a pencil.
Yeah. Or doing the work practically, like in science or geography or something, where they can access the work and still get so much out of it without even picking up a pen or a piece of paper.
Yeah, or like verbally as well. Like you don't have
Mm.
to use, yeah, there was that big, I'm trying to think when it was, there was they put pens down, like initiative, wasn't there, like day for putting pens down and not using pens for a whole day. Things like that. I think we just need to remember that, yeah, writing can be, there will be children who writing isn't easy for, and we need to really help support them. Other things sort of for reading, making sure you're chunking text. A lot of this is common sense, but I think it's useful to have it all in one book.
Yeah.
But like chunking information into big chunks rather than a long bit of prose for kids to read, really easy to do, doesn't really add any extra workload for teachers, but it makes a huge difference for some of our like dyslexic learners, for example.
Mm.
I had a little rant in the book about removing the pen license.
Oh my
Not
gosh.
a fan of the pen license.
Throwback.
I hate it. So if anyone's listening and hasn't been aware of the pen license, it's basically where when children are good enough to be able to write with a pen, they are given this license to use a pen in lessons as opposed to a pencil. And yeah, I basically, I haven't minced my words, Emily, as you'd expect. And I think it's like ableist. I really do. I
I
don't
do as well.
like
Yeah.
if you've got a child with, I don't know, who've got dyspraxia or I don't know, cerebral palsy or anything that makes handwriting difficult for
Yeah.
them and they can't physically do it, how on earth is that fair that they can never get that reward, or their reward will be much later on as a result of something that's completely out of their control? It's just not fair.
Yeah. And damaging to their self-esteem to see that they might be behind their peers who have got their pen license and they're still stuck on pencil when actually their writing could be brilliant. It's just like
Yeah,
their handwriting that holds them back a little bit. And as long as it's legible, I just think,
I
just
know.
give them a pen.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it makes me cross. It really does. Yeah. Other things I put in that chapter are things like technology, so using, like we've got such amazing technology now, and I think I know it can be expensive, but I think it's really important we try and utilize technology to help children with SEND as much as we can. So things like using reader pens, word processors, even things like audiobooks to help
Yeah.
like that sort of love of literacy, or help children be able to be reading a similar thing to their peers. Like if their peers are reading a Tom Gates book and they can't quite access that yet, letting them listen to it on an audiobook so that at least they're in the same conversations and they're part of the crowd.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. Things like decodable books and making sure that we're choosing books that are age and stage appropriate, books that children can read but are also not babyish for them. So again, thinking of the self-esteem.
They're
And then,
hard to find. They're
yeah,
hard to come across, aren't they? Especially when you teach older learners, you realize that you can't have them reading those really young books because it just knocks their self-esteem.
yeah. And then yeah, just loads of resources in terms of resources as well as technology. There's loads of like really simple, cheap, really, cheap things that you can use, like highlighters, sticky notes, lots of wonderful games like word games you can use, ones you can make up yourself, word maps, all of these sorts of things can help. But yeah, I won't go again, I'll stop there so I don't ruin the book.
So I noticed on the back of the cover, the blurb mentions that all the strategies are neuro-inclusive. So can you tell us what that term means and why it was important to you and how you've achieved that in the book, do you think?
Oh, thanks, Emily. I knew you'd be interested in this bit. This is right up your street, is
It
neuro
is, yeah.
diversity affirming stuff. So yeah, what I mean by that is us not viewing neurodivergence as a negative that needs to be sort of fixed, but we're seeing that neurodivergent people have their own strengths and that a different way of thinking should be nurtured, it should be encouraged. And I suppose we need to support them and make sure we're not trying to change them. We're not trying to make them act more neurotypical in the activities that we're giving them. Because obviously that can reinforce masking, which is when like a child or an adult can like consciously or subconsciously hide parts of their true self to fit in. And this can come at great expense, can't it? Like mentally and emotionally. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I was keen for all, and I hope I have achieved it. I feel like I have, but I hope I have. I wanted to make sure that there were no sort of social skills activities that, I didn't want anything where eye contact was forced, because we know eye contact for some children can be like physically painful for them, and we shouldn't be insisting on it at all. And things like being able to sit still for some children isn't a possibility at the moment. we need to be making sure we're not, because I think for eye contact as well, even if it wasn't physically painful, if a child is finding that difficult and they struggle to give eye contact, they're probably likely spending that whole lesson focusing on giving eye contact rather than
Yeah.
what you're teaching them. So even if you've managed to get them to look at you, like, oh, well done, great, now they can't concentrate on the lesson and they're masking and they're going to have problems afterwards as a result of this, you know, it's going to be emotionally and mentally draining for them. And yeah, so I just think it's counterintuitive anyway. So I think we need to be thinking about thinking about how we're making sure we're not being ableist again, and how we're supporting children with their social skills, but in a way that they want to be supported. So it's more of an opt-in thing, because there will be some like neurodivergent children who want sort of some help with social situations perhaps, and we can support them through that, but it's got to be them wanting it, and it's got to be us helping them in a way that's appropriate to them, that isn't forcing them to try and be more neurotypical.
Yeah, and not seeing neurotypical as like the gold standard that everyone should be working towards.
Yeah, but it's a huge shift, isn't it? It's a huge shift in thinking, and I think it's going to take a while. I feel like there's progress being made at the moment, but I think it's a big.
Yeah, because those inclusive strategies don't just support learners with SEND, they support all learners, and even the ones that might be undiagnosed or unrecognized in their neurodivergence. So yeah, I think that is really important, like you say, and I think you probably have hit the nail on the head there. We know that some children have difficulties in school with the sensory processing differences.
Yeah.
Is this something the book can help teachers support children with?
Yes, there's a whole chapter on it.
Fab.
Again, I think sensory processing differences are a much bigger barrier to learning than we've traditionally realised. I don't think it was something I got taught in my like PGCE. I don't know about you, Emily, but
No, I didn't have hardly any SEN training apart from the week that I did, and then I worked in that school for 4 years afterwards. So
yeah.
yeah,
I feel, unless you're really looking for it, you're not being told these things, then it's a much bigger barrier, I think, to learning is sensory processing differences than we realise. And I think people are catching on to it now. But yeah, so people process sensory information, don't they, in different ways. If you think, I suppose for listeners listening right now, if you think about how you're listening to the podcast, maybe you're lucky enough to be sat on the sofa with a cup of coffee, and wherever you are, if you just stop for a moment and have a think about like all the things around you. So you might be able to hear a busy street next to you, you might be able to smell the aroma of your coffee. The sun could be like warming your face slightly, shining through the window. I don't know where you are and what you're doing. You're probably just doing your washing and it's a bit stressful, but the feel of the washing in your hands, whatever. So think about all your senses and all the things you can feel. But then think about somebody who's got a potential sensory difference and how they might feel if they're listening to the podcast now. So those cars that you can hear going past gently past your window, they could be really, really loud for that child. They could be making it really difficult for them to concentrate. The sunshine that was gently touching your face and feeling quite lovely might actually be physically painful for that child. They might be in their eyes. They might not be able to concentrate because they've got the sun in their eyes. The sofa might be all scratchy. They might be able to feel a label on there. They might be feeling really uncomfortable. And that coffee smell, to you, it smells lovely, but to them, it might be making them feel really sick. And then imagine trying to listen to the podcast whilst you're doing that and trying to concentrate on what on earth I'm saying. And I think that's what it's like. And obviously, I don't know, but I imagine that's the sort of what it's like day in, day out for our children who've got sensory processing differences in the classroom. And we really need to think about it, because that would massively impact on your learning. I don't know how you could learn whilst all of that's going on. That'd be really tricky, wouldn't it, Emily?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, and we also need to remember that it's not just, I've given an example of someone who's hypersensitive to loads of different senses, but it's not just hypersensitivity. It could be someone who's hyposensitive, so undersensitive to some inputs. So they might not know when they're hungry, or they might not know when they're thirsty. And it's thinking about things very differently. And I think we need to catch up on this in schools a little bit, and it'll make a huge difference to a lot of children who have sensory processing differences.
Yeah, I think so as well. And understanding the fact that there are more senses that we have than we're actually taught about. We're taught we have 5 senses, but we actually have 8. And the other 3 are really important for our learners with SEND, and that's why they need so much movement. It's why they need so much, sensory input time and other things that if you're working in a mainstream school, you don't necessarily see. But yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, just what you said, Emily, was made me laugh, because when you said there's more senses than we realise, when I sent it to one of my friends is a secondary science teacher, and I got her to read part of the bit on sensory just to double check my science knowledge was correct still, and she was like, what, there's that many senses? And I'm like,
And
yes.
that's the thing, you
And
don't know.
because she doesn't need to know it, and it's not her fault. She's, she's brilliant. She's really, really clever. It's not any reflection on her if you're listening. But but yeah, it's that thing, you don't know unless you know it. And for someone, yeah, you need someone to point it out to you so you can be aware and so you can support these children the best way you can. Because I just can't imagine being sat in a classroom with all of that going on. It must be so tricky. Like if you're like
Mm,
feeling that sensory overwhelm of all those different inputs, it must be really, really hard.
yeah, exactly. So what about behavior? Do you have a chapter on behavior?
No. So my editor and I discussed this, and I was really adamant I didn't want a chapter on behaviour. I think it's sort of, you would imagine there would be. I think it sort of lends itself. You'd think, oh, there'd be a chapter on behaviour, but I wanted to make like a little bit of stand, I suppose, and not do one. Because I think, especially for our youngest children, there's going to be a reason why they're, especially with children with SEND as well, there's going to be a reason why they're behaving in a way you don't want them to, and it could likely be due to an unmet need or to do with their SEND. So I thought if there was a chapter on it, I was really worried that people would just think, oh, right, well, I've got a child who has speech and language. I'll read that chapter, blah, blah, blah. Then struggling with speech and language. Oh, I've got that child's misbehaving. Right, I'll go to the behaviour chapter. And I didn't want people to think it was like behaviour was the thing to be solved, because what would you write? How would you write it? I don't even think it's possible, because there's always something behind that behaviour. So instead, what I did was I mentioned behaviour in each chapter to try and make the point that what you could be seeing as like a frustrated or disengaged child could actually be a speech and language problem. It could be
Yeah,
they're struggling with their literacy. It could be they're struggling with numeracy, whatever. It fits into all the different chapters, and it's how you notice these children with SEND in those. Yeah, and I do have a
exactly.
chapter on emotional regulation instead. But I don't see that as behaviour in a sense, because that's just how we're regulating our emotions. But I suppose if you've got a child who's struggling with their emotions, then look at that chapter, because that one's useful, and it's talking about sort of the background of how children, they co-regulate before they can self-regulate, and all of that sort of stuff. Again, stuff we weren't taught in our PGCE, about like regulation and how children regulate their emotions and the support they need and all of that. So yeah, that chapter is probably the closest to behaviour, but no, there isn't a chapter by itself.
Yeah. And it's really important to teach emotional literacy to all children as well, not just learners with SEN, to help them understand that there's more emotions than just, because I feel like you just teach, when you're thinking about emotional literacy, you just teach happy, sad, angry,
Yeah.
worried. And
Yeah.
then you're like, there's just so many ranges of emotions that cause different sensations in our body, and they need to know about all those juicy ones. So lastly, where can people buy your book, and how can they follow you on social media to keep up with what you're up to?
Yeah, so the book can be found in all major bookshops, Emily,
Yeah.
including Amazon. Probably the best place to buy it. I know I shouldn't say that. Independent bookshops are probably the best place to buy it, but yeah, you will find it on Amazon. And yeah, I'll put the links in the show notes because I'm the host. And you can follow me on social media. I'm Sen Resource Blog on Twitter or X, and the Sen Resources blog on Instagram, and Sen Resources blog on Facebook. Is all like a variation of that depending on the limit of characters.
Okay, fab.
Thanks, Emily. This has been
That's
lovely.
okay. It's been amazing. And it's so good to hear, like, it's so good to hear about your book and how neuroaffirming and neuroinclusive it's going to be, because I think that's so important and so necessary for SEND teachers and probably for SEND parents as well.
Oh, thanks ever so much for being the host. Really appreciate it.
And you're so welcome.
That was really fun. Wasn't she a brilliant host? Hopefully you didn't just prefer her to me now and I'm going to do myself out of a job. No, Emily's brilliant. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my book as well. So thank you for listening. Yeah, so thanks for listening to Send in the Experts with me, Georgina Durrant. Please subscribe to our channel, have a look at the show notes for links to the book and to my blog, etc. And yeah, thanks again for listening.